Thing going. All right. Thank you, Kathy. Yes, the recording is in progress. And here we are. I think this is session 13 or something like that. We just started chapter 1 last Wednesday on page 27, which is where we're going to pick up today. And before we do that, is there any unfinished business? Anything anybody has that they're processing? Any questions from last week? Items that we didn't develop fully that you want to talk about?
I do, but I can't figure out what they are.
Okay. Well, you just hang on to that thought, Linda.
Thank you.
All right.
Dave,
Yes, dear.
if I remember right, at the end of last week, you said you would address something that Lori brought up.
Yeah, it's in the second paragraph on page 28. We're going to be able to hit it today. So I have not forgotten you, Lori. I remember what it was, and we will get to it. We'll be talking about it. Thanks, Patricia, for remembering as well. Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, we read the everything to top of page 29 last week. So I think let's just kind of dig in where we left off. I'm not going to read it all again. Or do you want to read it all again just to get the lay of the land? What's your preference? Anybody have a preference? Okay.
I wanted to tell you that I couldn't get it last week to work on that. And
That's
so
okay, dear. Don't worry about
I'm
it.
sorry.
It's all fine. All good.
Thank you.
We started with a poem from Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it's when kingfishers catch fire. And we spent some time on this because it's such a dense poem, but it's really important. He's using it to set up this whole chapter. So it's kind of important what the poet is talking about, and what Rohr is trying to get us to see about this poem that's going to be important as he develops this idea of a moment of awe. So in the poem, if you look at the first stanza, what he's talking about is that every mortal thing, everything that lives, is constantly telegraphing by its actions, choices, what it habitually does, by its own innate attributes, what is inside. So what is inside is being telegraphed outward. And obviously for us as people, what we are inside is being telegraphed outward with every choice we make and everything that we do and the way that we go about doing the things that we do. All of our insides are being telegraphed out, even when we think that we're being so clever and we're projecting only what we want people to see. But he goes further in the next stanza where he says, if a person is based in justice, then they are going to justice. That means they're going to do justice. They are going to keep grace. And then God's grace is going to be a part of everything that they do if that is their purpose. And then eventually we will be, at that point, be acting in God's eye, as he says, what in God's eye we actually are. We are transforming our inward parts to match God's, so that everything that we do is just going to be a reflection of that. And at that point, what we are in God's eyes is Christ, which, understood, is the incarnation of God in human form. So we are also God in human form in the sense of God's hands and feet, reflecting what God is. And then he makes this statement, for Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. And so there's that idea that, as Mother Teresa beautifully said, that Christ comes to her disguised as the face of every person that she serves in her ministry and in her work, and every person that she meets. And so Hopkins is basically saying the same thing. We are going to always be telegraphing what is inside. As what is inside becomes more and more aligned with God's values, God's will, his desire, delight, and deepest purpose, that is what will be coming out. And then we will also be the face of Christ, just as a human being who is reflecting who God is in every choice that we make. So that's going to be the setup for this idea of a divine ambush. And we went through this, and I know some of you had problem with the word ambush. We talked through that a bit last week, but let's just go and start on page 28, and let's read the whole thing, and then we'll go back and start to dissect because we didn't get very far into this. The divine ambush. I wonder if the only way that conversion, enlightenment, and transformation can happen is by a kind of divine ambush. It seems the ego has to be caught off guard to give up its constant surveillance. As long as you are fully in control, you're going to keep trying to steer the ship using your practiced responses. So you need to do some new practices to rewire the old system. The only way you will let yourself be ambushed is by trusting the ambusher and learning to trust that the darkness of such trustful intimacy will lead to depth, safety, freedom, and even love. Hang on to that phrase, the darkness of such trustful intimacy. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Then he says, I find that people are most likely to change when they are held inside of both safety and some necessary conflict, some tradition and some newness at the exact same time. And that's the sentence that Lori wants to discuss more. God can then come to you indirectly, catching you off guard and free from your illusions of control when you are at least somewhat empty instead of full of yourself. Then the ambush can happen. You only know it has happened after the fact, perhaps days or weeks or even years later. One day you will realize, God is so real to me now. How did I get here? All you know is that you did not engineer or even imagine this for yourself or by yourself. It is always done unto you. See Luke 1:38. And you realize quite gratefully that you were ambushed by a big love. Okay, let's go back and take this a little bit more apart. Before we get into the weeds here, any comments or insights having read it again this week? All right, so I wonder if the only way that conversion, enlightenment, and transformation can happen is by a kind of divine ambush. It seems that the ego has to be caught off guard to give up its constant surveillance. You see what he's saying there? Our ego is so well defended, right? It is so entrenched. We have had decades of experience with it. And we are so convinced that that voice in our head is us, really is who we are. We have identified with it, identified with all its beliefs, its world system. We're even identified with the core beliefs that are subconscious that we don't even really know are there, but they are constantly guiding our thought and behavior patterns. All of that is so well entrenched that it's always vigilant. It's always on guard. It is always creating that filter by which we see reality. How in the world are you going to penetrate that? In fact, the more that you use your ego to think about the things that maybe you want to change, or to think about contemplation, or to think about this way of spirituality, the more you are building and fortifying and thickening the wall that stands between you and that spirituality. Does that make sense? Well, what did Einstein say? He said, you cannot solve a problem using the same intellect that created the problem in the first place. I'm paraphrasing him probably fairly badly, but hopefully you get the point of what he's trying to say. You can't use the same thought system that created a problem to solve it. You're going to need to step outside of that to be able then to see creatively something new. And this is the problem that we're in. Go ahead, Lori.
I was listening to a psychiatrist named Jed Brewster, or they call him Dr. Jed, and he is renowned on addiction and behavioral addiction and drug and alcohol addiction. And he was saying we can't think our way out of addiction, which made me think about how wise Richard Rohr was naming the center of action and contemplation, that according to Dr. Judd, it takes action to get out of a thought or addiction. And I
Yeah.
thought that was very, very profound, that you can't think your way out of, I can't think my way out of bad behavior.
Absolutely. The slogan that we always used was, you can't think your way into right action. You need to act your way into right thinking. But basically the same idea, right? Is that you can't just think this stuff. That's not going to do it. All you're doing is identifying the problem, but you're not doing anything with that information. You can identify the problem, you can even identify the way through it, but until you act it out, that's the faith step, right? Faith is action. Action as if what you say is true. You're acting as if you're risking something to find out whether it's going to come through for you. Without that faith step, nothing happens. That's why faith is so important. But what we've done is we've sort of bastardized faith and turned it into just mere mental agreement, mental assent, just agreeing to believe something is true without taking the risk of actually acting on it. And that's not enough. That doesn't do it. We're still just sitting here on the couch thinking about something. Until we act on it, nothing really happens. Because, and what basically he's saying here, and what we're saying, what Einstein was saying, the more we think using the same manner of thinking, the same mode, the same worldview, about even something new or a new problem, the more we're locking ourselves into the same place we've always been. That's why Rohr is saying God has to catch us in an off-guard moment when our defenses are down, to actually crack the window, to part the curtains just enough so we can see another there out there. But it almost has to happen when we're not looking, because the more we look, the more we're locking ourselves into the regular ego consciousness. This is a real profound truth. And this is what contemplation is really all about. It is the practice of stepping outside of the old way of thinking, stepping outside of the habitual way that we have learned to identify ourselves, so that we can have this ambush, he calls it, this moment of awe, this breakthrough, this seeing of something that is radically different, and actually see it and not let it just pass through the filter. Making sense? Sort of, kind of? He goes on, as long as you are fully in control, you're going to keep trying to steer the ship using your own practiced responses. So you need to do some new practices to rewire the old system. So that's the deal here. These new practices are the contemplative practices that we've been talking about. The truth of the matter is our ego gives us a sense of control. Our ego gives us a sense of power. That's why we hang on to it so ferociously, because without that, we're really blowing about in the breeze. And the greatest terror of a human being is uncertainty. We abhor uncertainty. We want to know things. We want to have them under rational control. And nobody gives up power voluntarily, except George Washington. He's the only one I know who gave up power voluntarily. The rest of us hold on to it. And there's a great little scene in The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. If you remember when Neo goes to visit the Oracle, and there's this, in the anteroom, in the front room, there's this room full of kids, and they're all doing these paranormal things. They're levitating and spinning balls in the air. And one kid is sitting there and he's bending spoons with his mind. I don't know if you remember that. The spoon bends over just as he's looking at it. And Neo's watching him very intently. And the little boy looks up at him and says, "Don't try to bend the spoon. That's impossible. Only try to see the truth." And Neo says, "What truth?" "There is no spoon." So here's the thing. Once we finally see the truth that there is no power, we are powerless. We don't have the control that we think that the ego tells us we have. We can give up an illusion, but we're not going to give up the power that we think we have inside the illusion. So this is how the ego works with us. And so to step outside of that, see that the emperor really has no clothes, right? To see that there is no spoon, that there is no power, Now we've taken a step toward being able to move on down the road, rewire the old system. How's that for baking your noodle? How we doing, huh?
I think it's
All
nice.
right.
Clear as mud.
Seriously, Bill, is it not making any sense?
A little bit, but a
Uh-huh.
lot of it's like, huh?
Can you articulate the part that is not making sense?
I can comprehend the being open to seeing things differently. The challenge of it for me is where's this going?
Where is this going? Is that
Yeah,
what you
where
said?
is this leading to? What is this leading to? And not putting an expectation on it, but just sitting there, just kind of waiting and being open to something, but I have no idea what's going to happen. Aimless,
And
feeling of aimlessness, of just kind of, that's why I say, huh? What, I mean, where does this go? I'm so,
well, you know what, Bill, that's sort of part of it, though. If we
yeah,
bring our agenda where this needs to go, where we want it to go, what outcome we hope to achieve to our contemplative practice, then we're cooked before we start,
right.
right?
There's but my still in the back of my, so I practice this empty, not expecting, quiet solitude. But there's, the voice inside of me is like, I'm trusting that I'm gonna get something out of this, that it's gonna bring me nearer to a greater awareness of God's presence in my life. But it's like, it's uncertain where it's going at all. Am I just as Ellen wrote a little poem for me, it's like I'm trusting the sage in one sense, and yet I don't know where this is going.
And that's sort of the nature of it, unfortunately. You
Yeah.
know, we can be convinced it's going someplace good. We can say it's going toward the Father's love. We can say, that everything is going to be okay in that ultimate presence that we're talking about. But we really don't know how or why. I sort of paraphrased Thomas Merton's prayer in our opening prayer. He says, "Hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if I'm on the right road to get there. I don't even know if what I'm doing is pleasing to God, but I have the desire to please God. And
Yeah.
so I know that desire is in and of itself pleasing to God. So I'm just going to hang on to that. That's all I can really hang on to. That's
That's true.
often the best we can do at the beginning of the journey.
But it's I think I chew on the fact of, what am I becoming convinced of? And I can't say that I am with where this contemplation goes. I'm not convinced yet. I don't know where it's going. It's not illuminated itself in one sense. I do feel like my heart is one of wanting to be closer to God and not hear my voice, but hear his voice. But the convincing part within my mind is not convinced yet.
And here's the other thing, though, the conviction really isn't rational. And the voice of God is not going to be in language that you can understand, right? It's still going to be non-rational. He's still going to speak out of the silence. And so it's going to be a different kind of knowing, which also is maddening to the rational mind. And not only that, as Rohr says 2 paragraphs down, you're not going to know it in real time. It's going to come to you in retrospect. You're going to realize it afterwards. It's going to be something that happens later. And this is uncanny the way it worked for me as well in contemplative practice. It's like all of a sudden things were coming from the side just later on at random times during the day, and not during the intentional or concentrated times of centering prayer or when I felt I was trying to practice contemplatively. It was unguarded moments that they would come through, kind of what he's saying here. You know, again, remember that parable of Jesus of the growing seed. You know, the farmer shows up every day and he plants and he tends and he pulls weeds and he waters and he does everything he's supposed to do. But at the end of the day, he just goes home and goes to bed. And while he's sleeping, stuff that he doesn't know anything of or could begin to explain or understand is taking place. The miracle takes place while he's sleeping. And he gets up to see that grain starting to pop out of the soil. So he did everything to create the ideal conditions. But what actually was taking place was when he was sleeping, when he's unguarded, when he's not thinking on it or working on it. That is Jesus trying to show us the nature of this contemplative journey. It works like that. All we can do is set the stage for it. We can set the ideal conditions. What happens in those is beyond our knowledge and happens when we're not looking.
Yeah.
And I know that's not satisfying, but that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
So my take on this is that, you know, when I said the learned people said there's God, the sage says you're there. They can't be wrong, can they? That's what's going on in my head. So
Who can't be wrong? I'm sorry.
like the learned people, the sage people who wrote the Bible, people who believe in it, the people who had learned these for 30 years, you know, the theology of it, this has been discussed, thought of, and all that. And I'm saying they can't be wrong, can they? That's where I'm at. So I said, okay, well, that's how it is. And so I was reading this small article about Mother Teresa, that when she died, she wrote all these letters to her spiritual counselor that she cannot feel the presence of God. And yet she did what she did in Calcutta. Because at the end of the day, what does it matter? Whether you feel the presence or not, do it anyway. I think that was part of the lesson I'm hearing.
Yeah. Well, to her credit, she kept showing up, right?
Right.
Now, if you know the shape of Teresa's life, when she was very young and still in Albania, she had an immense and an amazing mystical experience that launched her whole career and launched her ministry, gave her the chutzpah to be able to stand up as a 4-foot something woman and do something that no woman had ever done before, you know, become the head of an actual ministry, you know, within the church, and to do what she did. And that was something that was, you know, quite unique. But that incident that happened early in life was never repeated in her life in the same way or the same intensity. And so I'm wondering if part of her problem is that she kept expecting to repeat that God's presence would come back the way it was, that it happened to her in her youth, and she wasn't getting that anymore. I mean, I don't know, you know, why wasn't she able to settle into the dark night of the soul, you know, in God speaking in less spectacular ways? I don't know, but reading those letters that she had written over 60 years to her spiritual advisor, or however long that span was, you know, she was really lamenting the fact, and it was eating at her, that she didn't have that kind of connection with God, that more felt connection. But whatever it was, you know, this is why it's so important. We spent a whole session a while back talking about, how does God speak to you? How have you learned that God is communicating with you? And that's an important thing for us to know for ourselves, so that we're not expecting something else.
Or is what you're saying.
As far as the sages not being wrong, I suppose it depends on what sage you're listening to, because people are wrong all the time. So, you know, be careful about that. I trust Jesus as sage, you know. There's been a few times where the doubt got so bad that the only thing I could do is say, you know what? Jesus believed, so I'm going to. I'm just going to act on that. And that's all I got. That's all I got left right now. because nothing else seems to be present. And that got me through. You know, Jesus believed, so I will too. I'm going to act on that. So I guess that's trusting the sage, Ellen.
Mhm. But I'm thinking about Mother Teresa too. You know, now we're going to another tangent, but like you said too, that perhaps she was expecting this big, awesome thing again. It didn't come, but then she's saying, "I see God or Jesus in the faces of the people I serve." But isn't that in the mundane you see God? No? Yes? No?
Yeah, people are complicated, aren't they? Who knows what the mix was in her life? But there was a lot of pain and a lot of anguish in those letters, certainly being expressed. And yet you would have never known it from the outside looking in for what she continued to do to the day she died. So that's why those letters were, you know, such a revelation when they were published.
But then how does that work when it says, when we were just saying that we can't hide who we are, that we telegraph to people really who we are? So if we really telegraph people who we are, and Mother Teresa really did struggle, and to me, I totally get it with her, because I'm not looking for anything spectacular. I'm just sometimes it's just lonely. It is just flat out lonely. And I don't feel God. And I'm not looking for lightning. I'm not looking for, there's a buzz going on. Can anybody hear this buzz?
Yeah.
I think it's Ellen. I'm going to mute
Oh.
you, Ellen, just for a second. Yeah, it's something coming through your speaker, Ellen. So, but we
Okay.
can hear you fine when you're speaking.
Okay. So anyway, all I'm saying is it's interesting that she didn't telegraph to the world what was really going on, but I don't really know. For me, I don't really know that she was looking for something spectacular. It's just just the reinforcement, just knowing God's there. Just
I
knowing
don't know that
He's
she was
there.
looking for something spectacular either. I'm just speculating. But what I do believe is that Teresa did telegraph who she was. She was a woman of faith. Regardless of what she felt or didn't feel, she kept showing up. She kept acting as if what she said she believed was true, no matter what. That's huge.
I just now thought of that, what the Apostle Paul said in that famous verse where he said, "Now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face." So maybe Paul even experienced that same thing. He said, he didn't say all you, right? We see through a glass darkly, and then someday face to face. So I think the practical day to day, I wonder, did even somebody like Paul have it all together, or was he just another Mother Teresa who just kept showing up every day and acted as if it were all true? He'd met Jesus on the road. He had that one mystical experience that we know of, and maybe some others are right around that time. But how do we know that followed in the rest of his life? You know, we don't. So I don't know. But I think of
Well,
that verse.
yeah. And of course Paul had doubt. You know, that's the human condition. We all do. You know, nobody just is completely, you know, just skating above the human fray. You know, he expresses that when he says, you know, why is it the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, I do? What a wretched man. I mean, he's talking about that. We're watching him working out his you know, his instructions to the church in real time and struggling through it. He goes, this one I'm not sure is from the Lord. It's just from me. But this one I am sure is from the Lord. You know, you see him working it out. It's fascinating when you see how he is trying to work through this and trying to do the best he can for these nascent infant churches that he is planting and trying to do the best he can. But yeah, you know, he said, I had to learn to be content in all my circumstances. And that wasn't something that comes easy or naturally. And so we watch Paul working it out through the course of his epistles, and it's fascinating to see. And so every one of us carries uncertainty because life is uncertain. Our conviction can grow great enough that it overshadows the uncertainty, you know. But Teresa herself, when she was asked to pray for clarity, said, hey, you know, clarity is the last thing you're holding on to and need to let go of. But you have clarity. I don't have clarity. I have trust. Very different. She didn't see things clearly. She just trusted that if she kept putting her foot down, footfall after footfall, that there would be something solid to stand on. And that way she looked like she was clear, but she was still uncertain like the rest of us. So we're all subject to the human condition. And that's one of the beautiful things about Scripture from my point of view. Every single character in Scripture is flawed. Every single one of them shows their uncertainty and their doubt and makes bad choices and you know, spins around and tries to figure these things out. And so the Bible does not shy away from that. They don't present these heroes of faith as up on a pedestal and completely finished products. They show them in their human condition, which makes them good teachers for us, right? Okay, so continuing on. The only way you will let yourself be ambushed is by trusting the ambusher. Okay, there's that faith step. You know, you're gonna trust what you don't know is trustworthy yet, but you're gonna act as if. And so you're trusting the ambusher and learning to trust. The darkness of such trustful intimacy will lead to depth, safety, freedom, and even love. That's such an interesting phrase. Learning to trust that the darkness of such trustful intimacy. So he's talking about trusting the ambusher, but also trusting the darkness of such trustful intimacy will lead to depth, safety, freedom, and even love. How does that phrase strike you? The darkness of such trustful intimacy. What's he talking about?
It's saying something really important.
Oh, it is important. Yeah.
I wish I could bring the whole thing out.
We wish you could too, Linda.
Well, maybe I'll do it one day.
That'd be
Okay.
awesome.
I think it relates to what we've talked about before, and that is the difficulty with which we experience uncertainty, ambiguity. We want certainty. And so I think the darkness is that experience of real loss of certainty, and kind of throwing up your hands and saying, okay, wherever this is taking me, I'm going to go, even though I have no idea where it's leading. Like you were talking about, Bill. I have no idea where this is leading, but let's kind of go with it. It's scary.
I think that's exactly where he is going with it. And I think that this distinction he's trying to make with that kind of strange phrase is that this trusting the ambusher, this trustful intimacy is not clarity. It's not certainty. It's not going to feel that way. You would think that if you trusted something, you'd be very clear about it, but that's not the case. You know, we're going to trust this unseen God that everything will be okay, and we're going to actually risk something. We're going to act on it, but that doesn't mean we're going to feel clear about it. That doesn't mean we're going to be certain about it. That doesn't mean that we're going to just know that we know that we know that everything's going to work out in the direction we're headed. There's a darkness to this. And the darkness is that remaining uncertainty, even as we choose to trust. Not the way we would want it to be, right? To trust that the darkness of such trustful intimacy will lead to depth, safety, freedom, and even love. That's the faith walk, you know? Not by sight, but by faith. Isn't that the way the song goes? Walk by faith, not by sight.
You know, Dave, you said something earlier about just setting the stage for whatever God has ahead, and just having a sense of God's presence just in the order of creation, in that way that you said this on Sunday, Jesus said, don't follow me, follow what I do in the name of the Father and the way, and following the way of God as best we can comprehend. So setting the stage is sort of what I see this is I have to be willing to put myself and prepare myself into situations where I can actually clear out my brain and be in a position to hear the Holy Spirit. And I do trust that there is a way, because I see the order around me. I obviously see all the challenge, but at least it feels like there's a purpose in doing the work that I do or what I'm pursuing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You were describing Mother Teresa, she gave herself into serving people around her, and in that effort, she was experiencing God. Whatever it was she picked that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of, I don't know why this is ringing around in my head, but my son's kindergarten teacher in Lawrence, Kansas, her son was all-pro basketball player, and the kids were all talking about the word luck. And she gave them the definition of luck is when timing and preparation converge. If you don't do the preparation, and I'm relating this to what you say in setting the stage and putting yourself in a place to keep walking, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, some days that at least you're putting yourself in a position to be meeting God. At least that's what I'm trusting. That's what I'm leaning into.
That's good. That's good. So yeah, we're setting the stage. We're setting the ideal conditions for this encounter to take place, this ambush to take place. Illumination, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, spiritual awakening, right? What are the tools for that? For the gardener, it's going to be what? Soil, water, sun, air. But for the contemplative, it's going to be silence, solitude, stillness, and simplicity. Those are the tools that we use to create this ideal environment, to set the stage for something to happen. Because the more that we steep in those 4 S's, the more that we are in silence and solitude and stillness and simplicity, the more we are prepared to have our defenses down egoically so that something can break through. We can have that moment where something just breaks through. In Zen tradition, it was up to the master to sense when the student was ready, right at that point where something could break through. And it could be anything that would break them through. Sometimes the master would come up quietly behind the student who was meditating and then clap right behind their head. And it could be that breaks them through. Or a clap of thunder in the heavens, as they're meditating, can break them through. It's the same kind of thing. We can get right to that point, and then something breaks us through. We see that thing that we didn't see before. We can be aware of a presence that we weren't aware of before because our defenses were up, because the ego was closed over on itself. So it's up to us to continuing to show up, being willing to show up when nothing seems to be happening the way Bill is describing, and just keep showing up. And then this thing happens when we're not really looking for it. And then you realize it. Sometimes you don't even realize it when it's happening. It's something that you become aware of later on. So it's an indirect process, even as we directly work to create the ideal environment, to set the stage. So now to get to where Laurie was, he says, I find that people are most likely to change when they are held inside of both safety and some necessary conflict, some tradition and some newness at the exact same time. And I know Laurie had the problem more with the necessary conflict part of it. So what are we talking about here? How are we most likely to change when we have both of those elements in play? the safety of some tradition, and the newness of some necessary conflict. How does that work? Any
I think
thoughts on
you need a catalyst to change. However, I won't change. You need a catalyst to change, but I
a
won't change.
catalyst? Are you saying a catalyst?
Yes,
Catalyst, good. Yeah.
catalyst. Yeah. And then, but I won't change unless I am assured I can go back to some safety. You know, like the analogy you made about the little boy going to the surf or the beach, and then but then oh yeah, I want to dare to do this. However, if the big waves are coming, I can run back to mom. So for you to dare to go there, there must be some safety net as well, because not many of us want to risk 100%, but 50% is okay. Yeah.
That works.
Can
Think
I
about what we're trying to do at the effect, okay? At the effect, we're trying to create a community and a place that is safe, where everyone is accepted exactly as they are. They don't need to change in order to be acceptable. They don't need to change in order to be a part of us. They can come in all imperfection and they can be here. We're trying to make it as safe a place as possible to make mistakes, to experiment, to not be ridiculed if you go a bridge too far and then need to pull back, right? We want to give them the safety of that. And the traditions, the liturgy, the things that anchor us can all be part of that safety net, that place that it feels safe to strike out. At the same time, it's my job as a conflictor in chief to try to throw as many wrenches into the works as I possibly can. Think about the way that Jesus taught. His love is the safety, absolute acceptance of everybody that he encounters. At the same time, he is always challenging people with these impossible situations and scenarios and these insane images that just are shredding their sense of their culture and their place in society and so on and so forth. He's creating safety. So it's okay to be here and it's a safe place to experiment. And yet he's always creating some kind of conflict with the way they already think they understand the world works and their place in it. That's the safety and necessary conflict. And as Ellen said, it's a perfect word. It's a catalyst, you know, these conflicting ideas, these paradoxes, these contradictions that Jesus is constantly introducing, these challenges to the way that just they think life is that catalyst to say, hey, what's going on here? Can I actually start to challenge my own way of thinking? Can I start to question my own way of thinking? That's now, I've been given permission to do that. And here's a safe place in order to do it. But if we are so afraid that we don't have a safe place from which to challenge anything, if we don't feel that we've been given permission to question, then guess what? We're just not going to do it. We need the safety of that acceptance to be able to challenge these things and find out where we land. But we also need the conflict, the newness of something that we know that we haven't heard before or haven't heard in this way in order to take those first few steps.
Dave, I also think you keep saying safety, and I like that word. But to me, it's also trust. The little boy that trusts his mother's going to be there. There's consistency there. You know, the little boy can go back to the mother. We as a community, we trust you as a teacher because you haven't, laugh at us and make fun of us, and you don't hurt us. You create an environment for us so that we're in a trusting environment. And I think anybody that wants to take a risk, I mean, we in our company, we would try to find leaders that would allow people to fail so that they could take risks to fail and not feel, cast out or, admonished into the next universe because they screwed up and did something wrong. So there is a trust factor there too, which is a part of the safety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to trust that we can ask what we maybe consider a dumb question, and we're not going to be ridiculed for the question. Just ask the question. There is no dumb question. I mean, that's why we're here. We're here to ask questions. We're here to experiment. We're here to go too far and then pull back, because how are we going to know what's too far until we go there? and then pull back. We have to be allowed to do that. We have to have a safe place to do that. And yet we also have to be conflicted. We also have to be challenged. We also have to have that catalyst put under our seat that's going to cause the discomfort so that we are going to be motivated to do something other than what we always do.
Isn't that William's favorite topic, the divine dissatisfaction or something along those lines?
Devil's advocate.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
thinking about you, William, today, and I was wishing I was a 9. I was wishing I was anything but 2 on the Enneagram. Just make me anything but 2. Because I'm going to go back to, when someone dies suddenly and that then add on to that a change of faith and the turmoil that brings into one's life, and not knowing what ends up, knowing there's a God, but knowing that my understanding of God was all messed up, and trying to figure out what to do with that and what that means with the person that is no longer here, and what that means with me being left behind and making sense of this life without him, and trying to understand God in a totally different way. You want to talk about conflict and uncertainty, and holy moly, it's a lot. It's a lot. And so sometimes I don't know what to think about that. And sometimes, honestly, Dave, sometimes I feel like when I listen to you with contemplation, I think, does he really have this, or am I just liking the idea and this is just the emperor's new clothes? Because I can only practice contemplation for 2 to 3 minutes with my monkey brain. And then, and it's like, that's the best I can do. And sometimes I think, are you really telling me that, even with Richard Rohr, is he really telling me the truth? Because this just isn't working right now. I mean, but I keep showing up. I'm not saying I don't, but I'm thinking, gosh, this is hard. So make me a 9. I'd rather have sloth. Just make me slothful. I would rather do that than be a 2 with attachment issues. Thank you.
You just want to check out as a 9, right?
Yes, you 9s are the best, because you know what? You just go your merry way, and if people like you, you're fine. And if people don't like you, you're fine with that too. Whereas being a 2, I want everybody to like me, and guess what? You don't. And now I'm okay with that part of it, but holy moly.
As I hear you talk, Lori, and from what I know that you've shared with me about your life, you've had plenty of conflict, right? But what you haven't had is safety. You haven't had a safe place from which to be able to deal with the conflict. And so that's the balance that you're looking for. And I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a safe place for you to be able to say what you need to say and to work through things. But from your high demand religion, the home of your upbringing, to the business that you are trying to continue after Dale's death, I mean, all of those things, that is not a safe place. And so that you're out of balance in this direction, maybe, and other people are out of balance in the other direction where they have the safety and the tradition, but they're not letting in that necessary conflict. So creating that balance is going to be everything. And then you will have the wherewithal, I think, to start dealing with some of these conflicts that are just hitting you one after the other.
Lori, I'm with you. I need more of a safe place. I just discovered you guys less than a year ago, and 4.5 years ago, I had a breakdown and ended up in the hospital and lost my religion, left church for 4 years. I've had no firm grounding. All of a sudden, all my doctrinal beliefs were in question. I flirted with atheism. I mean, I just was a wreck. And finding you guys, finding a local vineyard church where I would be accepted with all those questions and not called a heretic or have people afraid of me. I'm finally starting to get some of that feeling of safety. You know what I mean? but I've had 4 years of just wreckage, conflict, and that's been hard for me. So I know where you're at, different reasons, but I know where you're at.
Mhm. And to comment on the second part of what you were talking about, Lori, that, can you really believe me or believe Rohr or believe anyone who is talking about contemplation? I take that to mean, do we really have that kind of complete inner calm and inner peace and silence of mind? And the answer is absolutely not. Nobody lives 100% in that space. Nobody can and nobody should. I mean, it's always going to have to be a balance. As long as we're breathing here, we need our egoic consciousness. That's our interface with the world. That's how we're going to plan. That's how we're going to learn from mistakes. I mean, if we can't think abstractly, we're completely screwed. We need that. What we don't have is the balance between that and then be able to turn it off and just be present. We're looking for a balance between the two. So we're not looking to be 100% contemplative or we just be drooling in the corner all the time. It's not about that. On the other hand, we do want to develop it because that's the weak hand. That's the underdeveloped part of ourselves, both individually and culturally anymore. We don't value these things as a culture. So we're going to need to focus on them, be pulling the pendulum in the contemplative direction just to get it somewhere in the middle. But no, I am not, a paragon of contemplative virtue by any stretch of the imagination. But what I can say is that over these last 30 years, I have become more and more silent and still, and I value simplicity much more. And I am able to deal with my particular brand of neurosis a lot easier than I could before I started the journey. So my stone is not yet smooth, but I'm a further pace down the road than I used to be. And I think that's all we can do as human beings. We're all individuals and we're all going to end up in a different individual spot, but the direction is the same. And so we just keep showing up and trying to practice these things. But I never want to give you all the impression that, that I'm anything other than what I am, a mixed bag, like everyone else.
Okay, so Lori, Lori, I have this app called Centering Prayer. I think Dave must have introduced me to it because it says Centering Prayer resources. So there's like the beginning prayer, and then there's that you could choose like the gong or these Buddhist bowl gong.
Yeah, I went and bought that. I bought that, and I was really I'm starting 2 to 3 minutes to do it because it is, because I'm used to, and what I loved is I went on this website that I can't remember what it is. I just went on there today and they teach how to do the contemplative prayer. It's a famous website, but anyway, the whole idea was that it takes both. It takes prayer with words and it takes prayer with stillness, that it's two different directions.
So there's prayers, and then they say concentrate on a word and just stay. And then what I did to mine is like 3 minutes or 5 minutes, it's up to you. And there's a gong in the beginning, at the end there'll be a gong. Lori, I fall asleep. I don't know if that's serenity. I don't know, or is it just because I'm tired? It's like 11 p.m. after work, after the whole day. But I would fall asleep, and then he'd go, that's the say, oh, your 5 minutes is up. Oh, okay. So I'm not sure what's happening there. But I felt rested.
But here's the other thing too. If you're too ADD to sit completely silently and still and try to do centering prayer, then do a walking meditation. Just do it while you're walking. Even if you're just walking the perimeter of your room, just get your feet moving, watch your feet, and go into the same space, or get on a treadmill or get on a stationary bike. You can move. Bill used to do his centering prayer when he was on hikes, up going through on paths and nature trails and whatnot. All of that's permissible. Do whatever you need to do to start getting in the ballpark. Sometimes just having your body moving can be enough to allow you to be able to just go. Some of my best centering prayer moments were when I was running early in the morning, and I literally felt like I was floating above myself, being taken along for the ride. And so there are other ways of doing this, and experiment with your personality type and the level of activity in your mind, try to get some other motion going and see how that works for you, because it's not just one way of doing this. Just have the goal of being not to choose to think about any of the thoughts that are present in your mind. If you're not bringing your attention to a point on any one thing, you're still in contemplative space. It's not that your mind gets completely quiet. It's that you choose not to think about any of the things that are present, both interiorly and coming through your senses from the outside. You just let them pass by. You wave as they go by. It's like that.
I've had a lifetime of training doing it the wrong way, listening to all the sounds, chasing all the thoughts and dreams and ambitions. And so
Mhm.
getting to this place that Dave's describing, and these books help us to understand these things. First, they don't make sense. It reminds me of a young child who goes out to the football practice and the coach tells him to run the play a certain way. And he says, that doesn't make any sense. And he says, just trust me and run the play. And he runs the play, and he has to do it 2, 3, 5, 7, 10 times before he says, Coach, thanks for being patient with me. I didn't realize that doing it your way would get me where I want to be the most. And so we're like that. When we start practicing this centering prayer and contemplation, and we're so used to all the noise going on in our lives, all the activities, that silence is not our native language. It's hard to find silence sometimes, but the more we understand the distractions and the things that take us away from the goal at hand, which is just to quiet down. If a thought comes in, notice it, let it pass by, it'll pass by, and trust me, there'll be another thought right behind it. And sooner or later, the play will be making sense, and you'll figure out how to get more quiet than sound rolling through your head.
Okay, so as we're running out of time here, let's just finish this section so that my OCD brain can rest tonight. Yeah. When we are finally in this place and we're starting to balance safety and this necessary conflict, God can then come to you indirectly, catching you off guard and free from your illusions of control when you are at least somewhat empty instead of full of yourself. Then the ambush can happen. So in that state where we become more undefended, we become more vulnerable, we become more humble because we're not fixated on the projections and the illusions of the egoic mind, then God can come indirectly. There is an there is a softening of the fortifications. You only know it has happened after the fact, perhaps days or weeks or even years later. One day you will realize God is so real to me now. How did I get here? And that was the experience for me. I couldn't will it to happen. I couldn't put a timetable on when it was going to happen. But I realized that, yeah, there was a difference in the quality of this presence. There was a difference in quality, not only of what I considered to be God's presence, but also kind of what we were talking about with Mother Teresa, seeing presence in all of the people around me and in all of the persons, places, and things that shared the moment with me. There was a difference in the quality of it that I started to realize again after the fact. All you know is that you did not engineer or even imagine this for yourself or by yourself. You didn't make it happen any more than the gardener in Jesus' parable made the plant germinate. All he could do was set the stage for it to happen. It is always done unto you. And if you look at Luke 138, this is the scene where Mary is visited by the angel Gabriel and told that she is going to bear a son. And her first thing is, well, how is this going to happen? I haven't known man. How am I going to have a baby? And at the end of that dialogue with the angel, she says, "Let it be done to me as you say." She just accepts that it's going to be done to her. She doesn't know how. She can't understand it. It's an absolute mystery. It doesn't make any sense, but let it be done to me as you say. It's that acquiescence. It's that submission, the S word, right? It is always done unto you, and you realize quite gratefully that you are ambushed by a big love. In other words, these things that we don't understand, taking us places that we really don't know where we're going, we can be okay with that. We can be led by that because it is a big love. It's a love that ultimately is not going to let anything happen to us that we are still accepted and loved, and everything will be okay. But it's not certainty like we wish it would be. All right, got through the section. So chew on that for a week and see what you come up with. And maybe we'll have something to talk about before we dive into the next section next week. If you come up with anything, maybe even make some notes that you can bring into our session next Wednesday and see how that goes. I just want to remind you, there's a lot of people watching the archives of these, the recordings of these, because I'm getting more and more comments. And one woman commented that she really appreciated our dissection of Hopkins' poem. That was something that she really appreciated. It's interesting to see how people are taking these discussions that we're having. And so that's why all your questions are so important, because I guarantee you the question that is in your head is in a bunch of other heads as well. And if you voice the question and we can talk about it, maybe it's a little bit, clearer to take those next steps. So anyway, good job. Okay, Scott.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this time sharing with each other, encouraging with each other, and struggling with each other, and our thoughts and imaginations, and this makes sense, that doesn't make sense, or judgments. And like the small child on the beach, looking out at the waves and being fascinated, you're the endless stretch of beach before us, filled with wonder and joy and excitement, and yet we want to run back away to the things we think we know. So it's hard for us to enter in, as you well know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just acknowledging that you're there. You're greater than our fears and our worries, our concerns that we're doing it right or can't get it right, or frustrations, or any of the emotions we go through. You're greater than all those things. And you bring a peace that really does surpass all understanding. Help us to find that peace, that presence, your joy, your happiness. We thank you, Lord, for hearing our prayers. It's in your mighty, holy, and precious name, Lord Jesus, we pray, we give our thanks, and we say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
Amen, everyone.
Happy
See you
Valentine's Day,
Sunday.
everybody.
Bye,
Happy
everybody.
See you next week.
Happy.
Bye.
Jordana.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night, good night, good night. Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night, good night, good night, good night.
Good night.
Happy
Good night, Carol.
Valentine's Day, Linda.
What?
Happy Valentine's Day, Linda.
Oh, thank you, all of
You
you
too,
also.
Jordana. We'll see you guys later.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.